In the beginning, there was only the dream. Long before the first samurai drew his sword beneath the cherry blossoms of ancient Japan, there existed in the hearts of humanity a deep yearning for honor, courage, and purpose. The story of the samurai begins not with steel and conflict, but with the gentle whisper of an ideal that would shape a civilization. Picture, if you will, the misty mountains of prehistoric Japan, where small communities lived in harmony with the rhythms of nature. These early peoples, known as the Jamin, understood that survival required more than mere existence. It demanded a code, a way of living that honored both the individual and the community. In their simple pottery and careful rituals, we see the first threads of what would become the samurai spirit. As the centuries drifted by like clouds across Mount Fuji, waves of migrants from the Asian mainland brought new ideas and technologies to the Japanese islands. The Yei people introduced rice cultivation and bronze working, transforming the landscape and society. With agriculture came the need for protection, for defense of the precious rice fields that sustained life itself. In these early agricultural communities, certain individuals began to emerge as protectors and leaders. They were not yet samurai in name, but they carried within them the essence of what would become the warrior ideal. These early guardians understood that true strength came not from conquest, but from service, service to their people, their land, and their ancestors. The imperial court, established in the early centuries of the Common Era, began to formalize these protective roles. As Buddhism and Confucianism flowed into Japan from China and Korea, they brought with them concepts of duty, righteousness, and the warrior-scholar ideal. The stage was being set for the emergence of a unique warrior class that would captivate the world's imagination. During the Heian period, which began in 794 CE, the imperial capital was established in what is now Kyoto. This was an age of extraordinary cultural refinement, where poetry, art, and literature flourished like lotus flowers in a peaceful pond. Yet even in this golden age of courtly elegance, the seeds of the samurai tradition were quietly taking root. In the provinces, far from the refined halls of the imperial court, local lords began to rely increasingly on mounted warriors to maintain order and protect their domains. These early bushi, or warrior gentlemen, combined martial prowess with administrative skill, serving as both sword and shield for their communities. They were the bridge between the aristocratic ideals of the court and the practical needs of rural Japan. As we drift deeper into this ancient dream, we can almost hear the distant sound of hoofbeats on mountain paths, the whisper of silk banners in the wind, and the gentle rustle of bamboo forests that would witness the birth of a legend. The samurai were not born from violence, but from a profound understanding that some things in life are worth protecting, worth dying for, and worth living for with absolute dedication. The Tara and Minamoto clans began to emerge as the most powerful warrior families, their influence spreading like ripples across a still lake. These were not mere soldiers, but cultivated individuals who understood that the way of the warrior required mastery not only of the sword, but of the heart, mind, and spirit. They studied poetry as intently as they practiced archery, understanding that true strength comes from balance. In the peaceful twilight of the Heian period, as the imperial court gradually lost its grip on the provinces, these warrior clans quietly assumed greater responsibility for maintaining order. They did so not through force alone, but through a growing understanding of their role as guardians of Japanese civilization itself. The dream of the samurai was becoming reality, one sunrise at a time. As the morning mist clears from the mountains of medieval Japan, we encounter the first true samurai emerging from the refined court culture of the Heian period. These early warriors were not the fierce fighters of popular imagination, but rather sophisticated courtiers who happened to excel in the martial arts. They moved through the world with the grace of dancers and the precision of calligraphers. The word samurai itself derives from the verb saburao, meaning to serve. This service was not mere employment, but a sacred duty that bound warrior to lord with bonds stronger than family ties. In the early days, these bonds were sealed not with dramatic ceremonies, but with quiet oaths spoken in moonlit gardens, promises that would echo through generations. Minamoto no Yorimitsu, one of the legendary early samurai, lived in the late 10th and early 11th centuries. He was famous not only for his martial prowess, but also for his kindness to his retainers and his deep appreciation for poetry and music. Stories tell of how he would compose verses while riding to battle, finding beauty even in the midst of conflict. The early samurai developed their skills through centuries of small-scale conflicts and hunting expeditions in the mountainous provinces. They learned to read the landscape like a scroll, understanding how wind patterns affected arrow flight and how seasonal changes influenced strategy. Their connection to nature was profound and mystical, informing every aspect of their warrior training. Archery was considered the most noble of the martial arts, requiring not just physical skill but mental discipline and spiritual clarity. The early samurai would spend hours in meditation before drawing their bows, understanding that the arrow's flight began in the archer's heart. They saw archery as a form of prayer, a way of aligning themselves with the cosmic order. The horse was sacred to the early samurai, not merely a tool of war but a spiritual companion. The bond between warrior and mount was celebrated in countless poems and stories. Training a war horse was considered as important as training oneself, requiring patience, understanding, and a deep respect for the animal's intelligence and courage. During this formative period, the samurai began to develop their distinctive aesthetic sensibilities. They understood that beauty and functionality were not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of excellence. Their armor was not just protective gear, but wearable art, each piece crafted with the same attention to detail as a temple sculpture. The early samurai lived by an unwritten code that emphasized loyalty, courage, and honor above personal gain. This code was not harsh or militaristic, but rather reflected a deep understanding of human nature and the importance of trust in society. It was a philosophy of life that saw warfare as only one aspect of a warrior's duties. Family lineage was crucial to the early samurai, not out of mere pride, but because it represented an unbroken chain of service and sacrifice. Each generation built upon the achievements of their ancestors while preparing the way for their descendants. This long view of time gave the samurai a unique perspective on their role in history. As the Heian period drew to a close, these early warriors found themselves increasingly called upon to maintain order in a changing world. They approached this responsibility with the same dedication they brought to their poetry and art, understanding that true strength lay not in domination but in protection, not in conquest but in preservation of what was precious and beautiful in Japanese civilization. Like ancient trees growing slowly toward the light, the great warrior clans of Japan developed their power gradually, almost imperceptibly, until they stood as mighty as the mountains themselves. The Taira and Minamoto clans emerged as the most prominent among these warrior houses, their rivalry destined to shape the course of Japanese history for centuries to come. The Taira clan, also known as the Hike, traced their lineage back to Emperor Kamu. They were known for their sophisticated court manners and their deep appreciation for the refined culture of the imperial capital. Taira no Kiyomori, the clan's most famous leader, moved with equal grace through the halls of power and the battlefields of the provinces. Kiyomori understood that true power lay not in military might alone, but in the delicate art of political alliance and cultural influence. He married his daughters into the imperial family and positioned his clan as protectors of traditional Japanese values. His approach was like that of a master gardener, cultivating influence with patience and wisdom. The Minamoto clan, known as the Genji, represented a different approach to warrior leadership. They were more closely connected to the provinces and drew their strength from the loyalty of rural samurai families. Their power was rooted in the soil of Japan itself, in the rice fields and mountain passes where ordinary people lived and worked. Minamoto no Yashi, called Hachiman Taro, became legendary for his martial prowess and his fair treatment of both allies and enemies. Stories tell of how he would pause in the midst of battle to appreciate the flight of wild geese or the beauty of autumn leaves, demonstrating the samurai ideal of finding harmony between the way of war and the way of peace. These clans did not seek conflict for its own sake, but rather found themselves drawn into disputes as they sought to maintain order and protect their territories. Their conflicts were often more like elaborate dances than modern warfare, with complex rules of engagement and deep respect for worthy opponents. The provincial samurai who served these great clans lived lives that balanced martial training with agricultural work. They were farmers who could become warriors when needed, poets who could wield swords, administrators who understood both literature and logistics. This versatility made them uniquely effective as a ruling class. Marriage alliances between warrior families were arranged with the same careful consideration given to military campaigns. These unions were not merely political arrangements, but were seen as ways to strengthen the entire warrior community, bringing together complementary strengths and sharing the burden of protecting Japanese civilization. The warrior clans developed elaborate systems of communication using drums, flags, and signal fires that allowed them to coordinate activities across vast distances. These networks became the foundation for rapid mobilization during times of crisis, but they also facilitated the sharing of cultural and technological innovations during times of peace. Religious observance played a central role in clan life, with each family maintaining shrines to their ancestors and patron deities. The samurai understood that their strength came not only from their own efforts, but from the spiritual support of those who had gone before them. Every important decision was made with consideration for how it would affect future generations. As these great clans grew in power and influence, they began to eclipse the authority of the imperial court itself. Yet they did so with such grace and respect for tradition that the transition seemed natural, like the changing of seasons or the passing of day into night. The age of warrior rule was beginning, but it arrived on silent feet, wrapped in silk and poetry. In the gentle twilight of the 12th century, a storm was gathering that would reshape Japan forever. The Genpei War, fought between the Tara and Minamoto clans from 1180 to 1185, was not merely a conflict between rival families, but a transformative moment when the old world gave way to the new, like cherry blossoms falling to make way for summer's green. The war began almost by accident, as many great historical events do. Tensions that had been building for decades finally erupted when Prince Machihito, a son of Emperor Go-Shirakawa, called upon the Minamoto clan to help him claim the throne. This call to arms awakened sleeping loyalties across the provinces, drawing samurai families into a conflict that would define their destiny. Minamoto no Yoritomo, the future shogun, emerged from exile to answer this call. For 20 years he had lived quietly in the Izu Peninsula, studying, reflecting, and preparing for a moment he somehow knew would come. When that moment arrived, he was ready not just militarily but spiritually, having used his years of exile to develop the wisdom that would make him a great leader. The early battles of the Genpei War were fought with a kind of ritualistic dignity that reflected the refined culture of the Heian period. Warriors would announce their names and lineages before engaging in combat, and single combat between champions was preferred to mass warfare. These encounters had the quality of elaborate ceremonies as much as military engagements. Minamoto no Yoshitsune, Yoritomo's younger brother, became the military genius of the war. His tactics were innovative and daring, yet they were always employed with respect for the traditions of honorable warfare. At the Battle of Ikainotani, he led a surprise cavalry charge down a steep cliff that defeated the Terra forces while minimizing casualties on both sides. The Terra clan, led by the experienced Terra no Munamari, fought with the desperation of those who saw their world disappearing before their eyes. They had become so associated with court culture and imperial tradition that their defeat meant not just personal loss, but the end of an entire way of life that had flourished for centuries. As the war progressed, it took on the character of a tragic epic. Both sides were bound by codes of honor that sometimes made victory more difficult but always preserved their humanity. Stories from this period tell of enemies who became friends, of warriors who saved their opponents' lives, and of battles that ended in poetry rather than slaughter. The sea battles of the Genpei War were particularly poetic, fought among the islands of the inland sea where fishermen and merchants had plied their trades for generations. The warriors adapted their land-based fighting techniques to naval combat, creating a unique form of warfare that combined the elegance of court dance with the practical necessities of seamanship. Women played crucial roles throughout the conflict, not only as political figures but sometimes as warriors themselves. Tamo Gozen, who fought alongside Yashitsune, became legendary for her skill with both bow and sword. She represented the samurai ideal that courage and honor were not limited by gender, but were qualities of the human spirit. The war's conclusion came at the naval battle of Dan no Yura in 1185, where the Terra fleet was finally defeated. Rather than face capture, many Terra nobles chose to drown themselves in the waters of the Shimonoseki Strait, including the child Emperor Antoku. This tragic ending gave the conflict the quality of a classical tragedy, beautiful and terrible in equal measure. With the Terra defeat, an era ended and a new one began. The age of courtly refinement gave way to the age of the warrior, but the transition was not a rejection of culture and learning. Instead, it represented the evolution of Japanese civilization, incorporating the best of the old world while adapting to the needs of the new. From the ashes of the Genpei War arose something entirely new in Japanese history, a government led by warriors rather than courtiers, yet one that honored the cultural achievements of the past while building a foundation for the future. Minamoto no Yoritomo, victorious but thoughtful, established his capital not in the refined atmosphere of Kyoto, but in the seaside town of Kamakura. The choice of Kamakura was deeply symbolic. This small fishing village, surrounded by mountains and facing the vast Pacific Ocean, represented the practical, grounded nature of warrior rule. Here, far from the elaborate ceremonies of the imperial court, Yoritomo could create a new form of government based on personal loyalty and military service rather than hereditary privilege and court rank. In 1192, Yoritomo received the title of Sei Taishogun, barbarian subduing generalissimo, from the emperor, formally establishing the institution that would dominate Japanese politics for the next 7 centuries. Yet this was not a military coup, but a careful political arrangement that preserved the dignity of the imperial institution while creating practical governance for a warrior society. The Kamakura shogunate developed a unique dual structure of government. The emperor remained the symbolic and spiritual head of the nation, maintaining his court in Kyoto with all its ancient ceremonies and cultural traditions. Meanwhile, the shogun in Kamakura exercised actual political and military authority, creating a system that honored both tradition and effectiveness. Yoritomo's approach to governance reflected the samurai ideal of service rather than domination. He established a network of provincial governors, or shugo, and estate stewards, or jido, who were responsible for maintaining order and collecting taxes in their assigned territories. These positions were awarded based on loyalty and competence rather than birth or court connections. The early shogunate placed great emphasis on justice and fair administration. Yoritomo personally heard legal cases and established precedents that balanced the rights of different social classes. His legal reforms were guided by common sense and practical wisdom rather than abstract theory, creating a legal system that ordinary people could understand and trust. Despite being a military government, the Kamakura shogunate was remarkably peaceful. The samurai class, having achieved political power, devoted themselves to developing the arts of peace as well as war. They became patrons of literature, sculpture, and architecture, creating a cultural synthesis that would define Japanese aesthetics for centuries. The shogunate's relationship with Buddhism was particularly important. Yoritomo and his successors supported the spread of Zen Buddhism, which appealed to the warrior temperament with its emphasis on discipline, direct experience, and the unity of spiritual and martial training. Zen temples became centers of learning and culture throughout the warrior-controlled territories. The tragic end of the Minamoto line. Yoritomo died in a riding accident, and his sons were eliminated by their maternal relatives, the Hojo, led to an unusual situation where the Hojo clan ruled as regents for puppet shoguns. This arrangement demonstrated the flexibility and stability of the institutions Yoritomo had created, which could survive even the extinction of their founding family. Under Hojo leadership, the shogunate faced its greatest test when Mongol invasions threatened Japan in 1274 and 1281. The successful defense of the homeland required unprecedented cooperation between the government and the warrior class, creating a sense of national unity that transcended regional and clan loyalties. The divine wind, or kamikaze, that destroyed the Mongol fleets was seen as validation of both the warrior government and the special protection that the gods extended to Japan. This victory established the samurai not just as effective rulers, but as the divinely appointed guardians of Japanese independence and cultural integrity. As we drift deeper into the story of the Kamakura period, we can imagine the sound of wooden sandals on stone pathways, the rustle of silk court dress mixing with the creak of leather armor, and the gentle splash of waves against the Kamakura shore, where a new form of civilization was taking root under the watchful stars. In the quiet moments between battles, in the contemplative spaces of temple gardens, and in the daily rituals of training and service, the samurai began to develop what would become known as bushido, the way of the warrior. This was not a written law but a living philosophy that grew organically from the experiences and aspirations of those who had dedicated their lives to service and protection. Bushido emerged gradually, like morning mist rising from a mountain lake, shaped by influences from Shintoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. From Shinto came the reverence for ancestors and the divine nature of the emperor. From Buddhism, the acceptance of impermanence and the cultivation of inner peace. And from Confucianism, the emphasis on loyalty, righteousness, and social harmony. The concept of loyalty, or chu, became the cornerstone of samurai ethics. This was not blind obedience, but rather a deep, personal commitment based on mutual respect and shared values. A samurai's loyalty to his lord was balanced by the lord's responsibility to govern justly and to care for his retainers' welfare. This created bonds that were stronger than legal contracts because they were rooted in honor and affection. Rectitude, or gi, represented the samurai's commitment to doing what was morally right regardless of personal cost. This principle guided warriors in their treatment of enemies, their conduct in battle, and their behavior in everyday life. It meant speaking truthfully, keeping promises, and protecting those who could not protect themselves, even when such actions brought no material reward. Courage, both physical and moral, was understood to be essential, but incomplete without wisdom and compassion. True courage meant facing one's fears and overcoming them through training and self-discipline. It also meant having the moral strength to oppose injustice and to admit one's mistakes. The samurai ideal celebrated brave warriors, but it equally honored those who prevented unnecessary conflicts through wisdom and diplomacy. The practice of respect, or rei, governed all social interactions, and reflected the samurai understanding that civilization depends on mutual recognition of human dignity. This respect extended not only to superiors and equals, but to servants, peasants, and even enemies. The elaborate courtesies of samurai culture were not empty formalities, but expressions of this fundamental respect for the humanity of others. Honesty and sincerity were considered so fundamental to samurai character that a warrior's word was considered as binding as any written contract. The phrase, "the word of a samurai," became synonymous with absolute reliability. This reputation for honesty made the samurai effective administrators and diplomats, as people knew they could be trusted to keep their agreements. Honor, or meiyo, was perhaps the most complex aspect of bushido because it encompassed both personal integrity and social reputation. A samurai was expected to maintain honor not only through brave deeds, but through consistent ethical behavior in all circumstances. The loss of honor was considered worse than death, because honor represented one's standing with both the living and the ancestors. The concept of duty, or jiri, extended beyond military service to include obligations to family, community, and society as a whole. This duty was not seen as a burden, but as a privilege, the opportunity to contribute to something larger than oneself. The samurai understood that individual fulfillment came through service to others rather than through selfish pursuits. Self-control, both emotional and physical, was cultivated through rigorous training in martial arts, meditation, and artistic pursuits. The samurai learned to master their own impulses and emotions so that they could respond to any situation with wisdom and composure. This self-mastery was seen as the foundation of all other virtues, because a person who could not control themselves could not be trusted to control anything else. The aesthetic dimension of bushido was expressed through the samurai's appreciation for beauty in all its forms, from the perfect execution of a sword technique to the composition of a haiku poem. This aesthetic sense was not mere decoration, but a reflection of the warrior's understanding that excellence in any field required the same dedication, precision, and spiritual commitment that characterized the martial arts. As gentle rain nourishes the earth without fanfare, the Hojo Regency guided Japan through some of its most crucial centuries, with a steady hand that preferred wisdom to spectacle. From 1203 to 1333, these remarkable administrators proved that true power lay not in dramatic gestures, but in consistent, thoughtful governance that put the nation's welfare above personal ambition. Hojo Takemasa, the first regent, established precedents for rule that emphasized collective decision-making and careful consultation. Rather than acting as a dictator, he worked with a council of advisors to make important decisions, understanding that the wisdom of many often exceeded the brilliance of one. This collaborative approach became a hallmark of Hojo administration. The Hojo created the Joi Shikimoku in 1232, a legal code that represented a revolutionary approach to justice. Unlike the complex Chinese-influenced laws that governed the imperial court, this code was written in simple Japanese that ordinary people could understand. It emphasized practical solutions to real problems rather than abstract legal theory, reflecting the warrior class's pragmatic approach to governance. Under Hojo guidance, the relationship between the warrior class and the agricultural population developed into a stable system that provided security for both groups. The samurai protected the farmers and their crops, while the farmers provided the rice that supported the warriors. This mutual dependence created a social harmony that lasted for centuries. The Hojo period saw remarkable innovations in military organization and defensive strategy. When the Mongol invasions threatened Japan, the Regency coordinated a national defense effort that mobilized samurai from across the country. The construction of defensive walls along the Kyushu coast demonstrated both their engineering capabilities and their commitment to protecting Japanese independence. Hojo Takeyori, one of the most capable regents, disguised himself as a common monk to travel throughout Japan and observe conditions firsthand. This practice of anonymous inspection allowed him to understand the real effects of government policies on ordinary people and to make adjustments based on actual rather than reported conditions. The Regency's support for Buddhism led to a flowering of temple construction and religious art that enriched Japanese culture immeasurably. The Hojo understood that a warrior government needed to nurture the spiritual and cultural life of the nation, not just its military capabilities. They patronized poets, painters, and sculptors as generously as they supported military innovations. During the Hojo period, the practice of adopting talented individuals into the family became common among warrior houses. This meritocratic approach allowed capable administrators and military leaders to rise regardless of their birth circumstances, creating a more flexible and efficient ruling class than one based purely on hereditary succession. The economic policies of the Hojo reflected their understanding that prosperity required both stability and growth. They encouraged trade, improved transportation networks, and standardized weights and measures across their territories. These practical reforms laid the foundation for Japan's economic development over the following centuries. Zen Buddhism found its greatest support during the Hojo period, as the regents appreciated its emphasis on discipline, direct experience, and practical wisdom. The great Zen temples of Kamakura, including Kenchō-ji and Engaku-ji, became centers of learning that preserved and transmitted both Buddhist teachings and Chinese cultural achievements. The Hojo established diplomatic relations with China that balanced respect for Chinese civilization with assertion of Japanese independence. They welcomed Chinese monks, scholars, and artists while maintaining Japan's political autonomy. This selective adoption of foreign influences became a characteristic feature of Japanese cultural development. As the Hojo period drew toward its close, economic pressures, and the costs of defending against the Mongol invasions began to strain the shogunate's resources. Yet even in decline, the Hojo maintained their commitment to just governance and cultural patronage, understanding that their legacy would be measured not by their power, but by their contributions to Japanese civilization. The gentle wisdom of the Hojo Regency, like moonlight on still water, illuminated the path forward for Japanese society. Their example of selfless service and thoughtful administration became part of the samurai ideal, demonstrating that true strength lay in the ability to nurture and protect rather than simply to conquer and dominate. Across the vast waters of the East China Sea, storm clouds were gathering that would test the very soul of Japan. The Mongol Empire, having conquered China and Korea, now turned its mighty gaze toward the islands of the rising sun. Yet what followed was not merely a military conflict, but a spiritual trial that would forge the Japanese identity in the fires of invasion and resistance. Kublai Khan, the great Mongol emperor, first sent diplomatic envoys to Japan in 1268, demanding submission to Mongol authority. The messages were written with all the confidence of a ruler who had never known defeat, but they were received by a people who had never known foreign domination. The Japanese response was dignified but firm. They would not submit to any earthly power. The first Mongol invasion came in 1274, with a fleet carrying 28,000 warriors from Korea and China. They landed on the beaches of Kyushu, where they encountered a form of warfare unlike any they had faced before. The Japanese samurai fought not as an organized army but as individual heroes, each warrior announcing his name and lineage before engaging in single combat. The Mongol forces, accustomed to mass formations and coordinated tactics, found themselves bewildered by this personalized approach to warfare. While they possessed superior numbers and advanced siege weapons, they could not adapt quickly to an enemy that treated battle as a series of individual duels rather than a collective engagement. As night fell on that first day of battle, a great storm arose from the sea, driving the Mongol fleet back to Korea with heavy losses. The Japanese saw this as divine intervention. The kami, the spirits of their land, had risen to defend their homeland. This conviction that Japan enjoyed special divine protection would shape the national consciousness for centuries to come. The 7 years between the first and second invasions were used wisely by the Hojo Regency. They constructed a great stone wall along the coastline of Hakata Bay, organized the defense of Kyushu more effectively, and prepared the samurai for a different kind of warfare. Most importantly, they unified the warrior class around the common purpose of defending their homeland. When the second invasion came in 1281, it was massive beyond anything previously seen in East Asian warfare. Over 140,000 Mongol, Chinese, and Korean warriors sailed in two great fleets toward Japan. The size of this armada reflected Kublai Khan's determination to bring Japan under Mongol rule by sheer overwhelming force. The Japanese defense was heroic in its intensity and coordination. Samurai warriors, armed with improved weapons and tactics learned from the first invasion, fought with a desperate courage that amazed even their enemies. Small boats manned by Japanese warriors harassed the Mongol fleet continuously, using guerrilla tactics that the Mongols found impossible to counter effectively. For nearly 2 months, the battle raged along the coasts of Kyushu. The Mongols established beachheads, but could not break through the organized Japanese resistance. The samurai had learned to fight as a unified force while maintaining their individual heroism, creating a synthesis of collective strategy and personal valor that proved remarkably effective. Then, as if summoned by the prayers of the entire nation, a great typhoon struck the Mongol fleet. For 2 days and nights, winds of incredible violence battered the ships, driving them onto rocky shores and scattering them across the waters. When the storm finally passed, the Mongol invasion force had been virtually destroyed by the fury of nature itself. The Japanese called this divine wind kamikaze, and its intervention convinced them that their islands were under the special protection of the gods. This belief became central to Japanese national identity, fostering a sense of divine mission and unique destiny that would influence their culture and politics for generations to come. The victory over the Mongols established Japan as the only nation successfully to resist Mongol conquest, but it came at enormous cost. The financial burden of maintaining defense preparations for decades afterward strained the resources of the Kamakura shogunate, contributing to its eventual collapse. Yet the spiritual and cultural benefits of victory far outweighed the material costs. In the aftermath of the Mongol invasions, the samurai class emerged with enhanced prestige and a deepened sense of their role as guardians of Japanese civilization. They had proven that courage and dedication could overcome seemingly impossible odds, and this victory became part of the foundation myth of samurai culture. As we contemplate this great trial by storm and steel, we can imagine the prayers offered at countless shrines, the vigils kept by families waiting for news from the battlefront, and the gratitude that rose like incense when word came that the divine wind had once again protected the land of the gods from foreign invasion. Like cherry blossoms scattered by spring winds, the old order gave way to something new and beautiful as the Ashikaga clan rose to establish a shogunate that would endure for over 2 centuries. The year 1336 marked not just a change in political leadership, but the beginning of an era when Japanese culture would achieve new heights of artistic refinement and spiritual depth. Ashikaga Takoji, the founder of this new shogunate, was a complex figure who embodied both the warrior traditions of his ancestors and a sophisticated understanding of politics and culture. Unlike the Kamakura shoguns who had ruled from their seaside fortress, Takoji established his capital in Kyoto, symbolically reuniting military and cultural authority in the ancient imperial city. The Ashikaga period, also known as the Muromachi era, was characterized by a unique synthesis of warrior governance and courtly refinement. The shoguns lived in magnificent palaces that rivaled those of the emperors, patronized poets and artists, and participated personally in the cultural life of the capital. They understood that true power required both military strength and cultural legitimacy. This era saw the development of the magnificent gardens that would become synonymous with Japanese aesthetic achievement. The Ashikaga shoguns, particularly Yoshimitsu and Yoshimasa, created landscape masterpieces that embodied the principles of Zen Buddhism in their careful arrangement of rocks, water, and plants. These gardens were meditation spaces that reflected the samurai ideal of finding beauty in simplicity. The relationship between the Ashikaga shogunate and the imperial court was more complex than that of earlier warrior governments. Rather than maintaining a clear separation between military and ceremonial authority, the Ashikaga shoguns sought to integrate themselves into the traditional hierarchy while maintaining effective control over the country's administration. Trade with China flourished during this period as the Ashikaga pursued diplomatic and commercial relations with the Ming dynasty. Japanese goods, particularly swords, folding fans, and decorative screens, found eager markets in China, while Chinese silk, porcelain, and books flowed into Japan. This cultural exchange enriched both civilizations and demonstrated the samurai government's sophisticated understanding of international relations. The development of No theater during the Ashikaga period represented a pinnacle of Japanese artistic achievement. Kanami and his son Zimi created a dramatic form that combined dance, music, and poetry into performances of extraordinary beauty and spiritual depth. These plays, often based on classical literature and Buddhist themes, reflected the samurai appreciation for both artistic excellence and philosophical contemplation. Ashikaga Yoshimitsu, the third shogun, achieved the remarkable feat of unifying the northern and southern imperial courts that had divided Japan for over half a century. His diplomatic skills and cultural sophistication allowed him to resolve this complex political situation through negotiation rather than warfare, demonstrating that the samurai ideal encompassed wisdom as well as courage. The famous Golden Pavilion, or Kinkakujai, built by Yoshimitsu as his retirement villa, embodied the aesthetic ideals of the Ashikaga period. This structure, covered in gold leaf and reflected in a carefully designed pond, represented the synthesis of worldly magnificence and spiritual aspiration that characterized the era. It was both a demonstration of power and a place of meditation. Zen Buddhism reached its greatest influence during the Ashikaga period, as the shoguns and their samurai retainers embraced its teachings on discipline, direct experience, and the integration of spiritual and worldly activities. The great Zen temples of Kyoto became centers of learning where monks and warriors studied together, sharing insights that enriched both religious and martial traditions. The tea ceremony began to develop during this period as Zen monks and cultured samurai sought ways to incorporate mindfulness and aesthetic appreciation into daily life. What started as a simple sharing of tea evolved into an elaborate art form that embodied principles of harmony, respect, purity, and tranquility, values that resonated deeply with the samurai spirit. Literature flourished under Ashikaga patronage, with works like the Chronicle of the Grand Pacification, recording the deeds of contemporary warriors while drawing inspiration from classical models. These writings demonstrated the samurai class's commitment to preserving their own history while maintaining connections to Japan's literary heritage. The Anin War, which began in 1467, marked the beginning of the decline of Ashikaga authority. This complex conflict, originally a succession dispute, gradually expanded to involve most of the major warrior families in Japan. The war's destructive effects on Kyoto and the surrounding provinces revealed the limitations of the Ashikaga system of governance. Yet even as political authority fragmented, the cultural achievements of the Ashikaga period continued to influence Japanese civilization. The artistic standards, philosophical insights, and aesthetic principles developed during this era became permanent features of samurai culture, demonstrating that true accomplishments transcend the political circumstances in which they are created. The Ashikaga shoguns, despite their eventual political decline, had succeeded in creating a synthesis of warrior practicality and cultural refinement that would define the samurai ideal for centuries to come. They proved that military leaders could also be patrons of the arts, philosophers, and guardians of beauty, as well as defenders of the realm. As the Ashikaga period drew toward its close, the foundations had been laid for the cultural flowering that would characterize later Japanese history. The gardens they created still inspire contemplation, the art they patronized still moves the human heart, and the ideals they embodied still speak to those who seek to balance strength with wisdom. Like thunder rolling across distant mountains, the sound of conflict began to echo throughout Japan as the central authority of the Ashikaga shogunate weakened and local lords asserted their independence. The Sengoku period, the age of warring states, was dawning, an era of nearly constant warfare that would paradoxically produce some of the greatest heroes and most profound cultural developments in Japanese history. This was not mindless violence, but rather a complex period of political reorganization in which ambitious leaders sought to create new forms of governance and social organization. The warfare of the Sengoku period was characterized by innovation, both military and administrative, as competing lords experimented with new strategies for achieving and maintaining power. The collapse of central authority allowed regional lords, or daimyo, to emerge as independent rulers of their domains. These were not mere warlords but sophisticated leaders who combined military prowess with administrative skill, cultural patronage, and diplomatic acumen. They understood that lasting power required more than martial strength. It required the loyalty and prosperity of their subjects. Oda Nobunaga emerged as one of the most significant figures of this turbulent age. From his base in Owari Province, he began a campaign of unification that would transform Japan. Nobunaga was innovative in his use of firearms, ruthless in his suppression of opposition, yet also a patron of the arts who appreciated beauty and elegance even in the midst of warfare. The introduction of firearms by Portuguese traders in 1543 revolutionized Japanese warfare, but the samurai adapted these new weapons to their existing military culture rather than allowing them to destroy traditional values. The combination of guns and swords, of mass formations and individual heroism, created a uniquely Japanese form of warfare that was both modern and traditional. Nobunaga's destruction of the Enryakuji temple complex on Mount Hiei in 1571 shocked the Buddhist establishment, but it also demonstrated his determination to subordinate religious authority to political control. This action, while harsh, was part of his broader effort to create a unified state in which all institutions served the common good rather than their own narrow interests. The rise of castle towns during this period reflected the changing nature of Japanese society. These fortified settlements, built around massive stone castles, became centers of administration, commerce, and culture. They represented the daimyo's commitment to protecting and nurturing civilian populations while maintaining military readiness. Take the Shinjin of Kai Province became legendary for his military innovations and his benevolent governance of his domain. His cavalry charges were famous throughout Japan, but he was equally renowned for his flood control projects, his fair taxation policies, and his patronage of scholars and artists. He embodied the ideal of the warrior administrator who served his people as well as his own ambitions. Yusugi Kenshin of Echigo Province, Takeda's great rival, was known for his personal piety and his code of honor that sometimes led him to assist enemies who were in desperate straits. Their famous battles at Kawanakajima became legendary not just for their military significance, but for the mutual respect the two leaders showed each other. The economic development that accompanied this military competition was remarkable. Daimyo invested heavily in agriculture, mining, and manufacturing to support their military campaigns. New crops were introduced, irrigation systems were improved, and artisan communities flourished under the protection of their warrior lords. Women of the samurai class played crucial roles during this period, often managing domains while their husbands were away campaigning. They received training in martial arts and administration, and some, like Lady Tsuruheim of Iyo, actually led troops in battle. The warrior culture recognized that courage and leadership were not limited by gender. The cultural achievements of the Sengoku period were as remarkable as its military innovations. Tea ceremony masters like Sen no Rikyu developed the aesthetic principles that would define Japanese taste for centuries. Poets, painters, and craftsmen found patronage among the competing daimyo, who understood that cultural accomplishments enhanced their prestige as much as military victories. As this age of conflict continued, it became clear that while warfare was transforming Japanese society, it was also strengthening the fundamental values of the samurai class. Loyalty, courage, and honor remained paramount, but they were being tested and refined in the crucible of constant competition and change. From the chaos of the warring states emerged three remarkable figures who would complete the unification of Japan through a combination of vision, determination, and strategic brilliance. Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu each brought unique talents to the great work of creating a unified nation, and together they transformed Japan from a collection of feuding domains into a single, powerful state. Nobunaga's revolutionary approach to warfare and governance laid the foundation for unification. His willingness to use any means necessary to achieve his goals, including the employment of common soldiers alongside samurai and the extensive use of firearms, demonstrated that effectiveness mattered more than tradition. Yet he also showed deep appreciation for culture and beauty, creating gardens and supporting artists even while campaigning. The tragic end of Nobunaga at Honnōji Temple in 1582, betrayed by a trusted retainer, showed that even the mightiest could fall victim to the treachery that characterized the age. Yet his death also demonstrated the loyalty he inspired in his followers, as Toyotomi Hideyoshi raced back from his own campaign to avenge his master and continue the work of unification. Hideyoshi's rise from humble origins to become ruler of Japan represented the social mobility that the warring states period had made possible. Born the son of a peasant, he rose through the ranks of Nobunaga's army through intelligence, loyalty, and exceptional organizational ability. His success proved that in this new age, merit could triumph over birth. Hideyoshi's campaigns of unification were characterized by a combination of military skill and diplomatic finesse. He understood that lasting peace required not just military victory, but also the willing submission of defeated enemies. His generous treatment of surrendering daimyo and his integration of former opponents into his administration created a stable foundation for his rule. The great castle at Osaka, built by Hideyoshi as his capital, represented the pinnacle of Japanese military architecture. Its massive stone foundations and elegant wooden superstructure combined practical defensive features with aesthetic beauty, demonstrating the sophisticated engineering capabilities that Japanese craftsmen had developed during the period of constant warfare. Hideyoshi's social reforms, including the separation of samurai and farmers and the prohibition of weapons for non-samurai classes, established the rigid social hierarchy that would characterize the following Tokugawa period. These measures, while restrictive, brought stability to a society that had been disrupted by decades of warfare and social mobility. The invasion of Korea, launched by Hideyoshi in 1592 and 1597, represented both the culmination of his ambitions and the beginning of his downfall. These campaigns, intended to conquer China through Korea, demonstrated Japanese military capabilities, but also revealed the limitations of even a unified Japan when confronting the vast continental powers. The Korean campaigns had profound effects on Japanese culture, bringing new technologies, artistic styles, and philosophical ideas to Japan. Korean potters, taken to Japan as prisoners, established ceramic traditions that would become famous throughout the world. These cultural exchanges showed that even military campaigns could contribute to civilization's advancement. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the final unifier, was distinguished by his patience and strategic thinking. He waited carefully for the right moment to assert his authority, and when that moment came at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, he was ready with alliances, resources, and a clear vision of the future he wanted to create. Ieyasu's victory at Sekigahara was decisive not just militarily, but psychologically. The battle lasted only 6 hours, but its outcome determined the political structure of Japan for the next 265 years. The speed and completeness of his victory demonstrated that the age of warfare was truly ending and the age of peace beginning. The establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate in Edo represented more than just another change of government. It marked the beginning of the longest period of peace in Japanese history. Iyasu's political arrangements, based on careful balance between central authority and local autonomy, created a system stable enough to endure for centuries. As we reflect on these three great unifiers, we can appreciate how each contributed essential elements to the final achievement. Nobunaga provided the vision and ruthless determination needed to break down the old system. Hideyoshi supplied the administrative genius required to build a new one, and Ieyasu offered the wisdom and patience necessary to make it permanent. Like a gentle stream flowing through a carefully tended garden, the Edo period brought to Japan a peace so profound and enduring that it transformed the very nature of samurai culture. For over 2.5 centuries, from 1603 to 1868, the Tokugawa shogunate maintained order through a sophisticated system of governance that balanced central authority with local autonomy, creating conditions for unprecedented cultural and economic development. The capital established at Edo, now modern Tokyo, grew from a small fishing village into one of the world's largest cities. The requirement that all daimyo maintain residences there and spend alternate years in attendance on the shogun created a vibrant urban culture that combined the best elements of all Japan's regional traditions in a single magnificent metropolis. The Sankinkatai system, which required the daimyo to travel regularly between their domains and Edo, had effects far beyond political control. These processions, involving thousands of retainers and elaborate ceremonial displays, created a network of roads, inns, and services that connected all parts of Japan and facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultural innovations. In this peaceful environment, the samurai class underwent a profound transformation. No longer primarily warriors, they became administrators, scholars, and cultural leaders. They studied Confucian classics, practiced calligraphy and poetry, and developed the subtle arts of governance that maintained harmony within their domains while serving the broader interests of the nation. The development of schools and literacy during the Edo period was remarkable by world standards. Not only did samurai receive extensive education, but merchants and even some farmers learned to read and write. This educational revolution created a population capable of appreciating sophisticated literature, theater, and art, contributing to the cultural flowering that characterized the era. Zen Buddhism continued to influence samurai culture, but it was joined by Neo-Confucianism as the dominant philosophical system. This Chinese-derived philosophy, with its emphasis on social harmony, moral cultivation, and the interconnectedness of all things, provided intellectual foundations for the peaceful society the Tokugawa had created. The isolation policy, or sakoku, which limited foreign contact to carefully controlled Dutch and Chinese trading posts, allowed Japanese culture to develop along its own unique lines without external pressure. This period of relative isolation permitted the full flowering of distinctively Japanese artistic and intellectual traditions that had been developing for centuries. Urban culture flourished as never before, particularly in the pleasure quarters of major cities where merchants and artisans gathered to enjoy theater, music, and literature. The kabuki theater, with its dynamic performances and elaborate costumes, provided entertainment that was both sophisticated and accessible to ordinary people, creating a shared cultural experience that united all social classes. The economic prosperity of the Edo period supported remarkable developments in craftsmanship and technology. Japanese artisans achieved levels of skill in metalworking, ceramics, textiles, and woodworking that amazed foreign visitors when the country was finally reopened. The famous swords of this period were works of art as much as weapons, representing centuries of accumulated technical knowledge and aesthetic refinement. Literature reached new heights during this peaceful era. The novels of Ihara Seikaku, the poetry of Matsuo Basho, and the philosophical writings of scholars like Yamaga Soko explored themes of human nature, social relationships, and the meaning of life with a sophistication that reflected the security and prosperity of the times. The haiku poetry that emerged during this period, particularly in the work of Basho, captured the essence of Japanese aesthetic sensibility in its appreciation for subtle beauty, seasonal change, and the profound significance of seemingly ordinary moments. These brief poems reflected the samurai ideal of finding meaning and beauty in everyday experience. Women of the samurai class during the Edo period received education in literature, arts, and domestic management that prepared them for their roles as partners in maintaining family honor and cultural traditions. While their public roles were limited, their influence on the cultural and moral development of future generations was profound and lasting. The merchant class, though officially ranked below farmers in the social hierarchy, accumulated wealth and cultural influence that rivaled that of the samurai. Their patronage of arts and entertainment created new forms of cultural expression that celebrated urban life and commercial success, adding vibrant new elements to Japanese civilization. As the Edo period matured, a growing sense of Japanese national identity began to emerge. Scholars of national learning rediscovered and celebrated Japan's ancient literary and religious traditions, creating a cultural foundation that would prove crucial when the country later faced the challenges of modernization and foreign contact. Like the breaking of a dam that has held back vast waters, the arrival of Commodore Perry's black ships in 1853 shattered the peaceful isolation of Edo Japan and set in motion forces that would transform not only the samurai class, but the entire structure of Japanese civilization. The Meiji Restoration of 1868 marked not an end, but a metamorphosis, the ancient samurai spirit taking new forms to meet the challenges of the modern world. The young Emperor Meiji, restored to active rule after centuries of symbolic authority, became the focus of a revolutionary transformation that would modernize Japan while preserving its essential cultural identity. The Charter Oath, proclaimed in 1868, promised that knowledge shall be sought throughout the world, and that all classes would be united in promoting the nation's welfare. The abolition of the hand system in 1871, replacing the old domains with modern prefectures, represented one of the most radical political transformations in world history. Former daimyo became governors and then private citizens, accepting the loss of their traditional authority with remarkable grace in service to the larger goal of national modernization. The samurai class faced the most dramatic changes of all. The Meiji government's decision to create a modern, Western-style military meant that the samurai's traditional monopoly on military service was ended. The final blow came in 1876 with the prohibition of wearing swords in public. The very symbol of samurai identity was removed by legal decree. Yet many samurai embraced these changes with the same spirit of service that had characterized their ancestors. They understood that true loyalty to Japan required adapting to new circumstances rather than clinging to outdated forms. Some became military officers in the new army, others entered business or education, and many traveled abroad to study Western science and technology. The Satsuma Rebellion of 1877, led by the great samurai hero Seigo Takamori, represented the last major resistance to the Meiji reforms. Seigo's tragic end, surrounded by government forces equipped with modern weapons, symbolized both the death of the old samurai order and the birth of modern Japan. Even in defeat, his dignity and courage inspired admiration from former enemies. The new Japanese military, created along Western lines but infused with samurai values of loyalty and sacrifice, proved remarkably effective. The victories over China in 1894-95 and Russia in 1904-05 demonstrated that Japan had successfully combined Western technology with Japanese spirit, creating a military force that astonished the world. Education became the new battlefield where samurai values found expression. Former samurai became teachers, administrators, and professors, transmitting their ideals of discipline, dedication, and service to new generations. The moral education curriculum in Japanese schools explicitly drew upon samurai traditions while preparing students for modern life. Industry and commerce, once considered beneath samurai dignity, became new fields for the application of samurai values. Entrepreneurs like Fukuzawa Yukichi and Shibusawa Ichi demonstrated that business could be conducted with the same honor and social responsibility that had characterized samurai governance, creating a distinctive Japanese approach to capitalism. The preservation of traditional arts and crafts during the Meiji period required the same dedication that samurai had once brought to martial training. Master swordsmiths, tea ceremony teachers, and martial arts instructors maintained their disciplines not as preparation for warfare, but as ways of preserving and transmitting the spiritual essence of Japanese culture. Women's education expanded dramatically during the Meiji period, as the government recognized that modernization required the active participation of all citizens. The samurai ideal of educated, morally upright women who could support their families and communities found new expression in schools, hospitals, and social welfare organizations. The Constitution of 1889 created a modern parliamentary system while preserving the emperor's sacred status and recognizing the continued importance of traditional values. This careful balance between innovation and preservation reflected the Meiji leaders' understanding that successful modernization required respect for the past as well as openness to the future. Overseas study became a new form of service to the nation, as thousands of young Japanese traveled to Europe and America to master Western knowledge and technology. They approached this task with the same systematic dedication that their samurai ancestors had brought to the study of Chinese classics, demonstrating that the capacity for learning and adaptation remained central to Japanese character. As the Meiji era progressed, it became clear that the transformation was not an abandonment of samurai values, but their evolution into new forms suitable for a modern nation. The spirit of service, the commitment to excellence, and the willingness to sacrifice for the common good remained constant even as their external expressions changed completely. In the smokestacks and railway lines of industrializing Japan, in the classrooms of new schools and the laboratories of emerging universities, the spirit of the samurai found new expression as the nation embraced modernity while maintaining its cultural soul. The early 20th century witnessed the remarkable transformation of ancient warrior ideals into the driving force behind Japan's emergence as a modern power. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905 demonstrated to the world that Japan had successfully merged traditional fighting spirit with modern military technology. Admiral Togo Hidekiro's victory at Tsushima and General Nogi Mersuke's sacrifice at Port Arthur became legendary examples of how samurai values could inspire success in modern warfare while maintaining the highest standards of honor and humanity. The development of Judo by Jigoro Kano exemplified the adaptation of martial traditions to modern needs. Kano transformed the practical fighting techniques of jiu-jitsu into an educational system that emphasized mental discipline, physical fitness, and moral development. His motto, mutual welfare and benefit, showed how competitive spirit could serve broader social purposes. Similarly, the formalization of kendo and kyudo preserved the spiritual dimensions of swordsmanship and archery while adapting them for peaceful practice. These arts became ways of cultivating character and maintaining connection with ancestral traditions, demonstrating that the essence of samurai training could transcend its original military applications. The business leaders of the Taisho and early Showa periods applied samurai principles to industrial development with remarkable success. Companies like Mitsubishi and Sumitomo operated according to codes of conduct that emphasized long-term thinking, employee welfare, and social responsibility, values derived directly from the samurai tradition of benevolent leadership. Education became perhaps the most important arena for transmitting samurai values to new generations. The concept of moral education in Japanese schools explicitly drew upon historical examples of loyalty, courage, and self-sacrifice, teaching students that individual success should serve larger social purposes and that true strength came from disciplined character development. The preservation of traditional arts during this period required the same dedication that samurai had once brought to martial training. Tea ceremony, flower arrangement, calligraphy, and other cultural practices were maintained not as mere aesthetic pursuits, but as methods of spiritual cultivation that could complement and balance the materialism of modern life. Women's roles evolved significantly during this period, but within a framework that honored traditional values while recognizing new opportunities. The good wife, wise mother, ideal incorporated samurai concepts of duty and self-sacrifice, while preparing women for active participation in modern society through education and social service. The military modernization of the early 20th century was guided by leaders who understood that technological superiority meant nothing without proper spirit and discipline. The Imperial Military Academy and Naval Academy produced officers who combined Western military science with Japanese concepts of honor, loyalty, and dedication to the emperor and nation. International recognition of Japanese achievements came not only through military victories, but through cultural and intellectual contributions. Japanese scholars, artists, and diplomats demonstrated that their nation had successfully joined the community of modern civilizations while maintaining its distinctive identity and values. The growing complexity of modern society required new forms of social organization, but these were built upon traditional foundations of group loyalty and mutual obligation. The village communities, business organizations, and professional associations that emerged during this period reflected samurai understanding of the importance of collective responsibility and shared purpose. Literature and philosophy of this period grappled with the tensions between traditional values and modern realities. Writers like Natsume Soseki explored the psychological challenges faced by individuals caught between old and new ways of life, while philosophers like Nishida Kitaro developed new syntheses of Eastern and Western thought. The establishment of modern universities provided new venues for the pursuit of knowledge and truth that samurai had always valued. Scholars approached their research with the same systematic dedication and ethical commitment that their ancestors had brought to the study of military strategy and classical literature. As Japan entered the turbulent decades of the early 20th century, it became clear that the samurai legacy provided both strength and challenges for a modernizing nation. The values of loyalty, sacrifice, and group solidarity that had served the country well in its transformation could also lead to extremism and blind obedience when taken to dangerous extremes. Through the storms of the 20th century, as Japan experienced both the heights of imperial expansion and the depths of devastating defeat, the samurai spirit underwent its most severe test. The decades from the 1930s through the 1960s would see this ancient tradition stretched, distorted, and ultimately purified through trials that challenged the very foundations of Japanese civilization. The military expansion of the 1930s and 1940s was justified by appeals to samurai ideals of loyalty and sacrifice. But these noble concepts were increasingly corrupted by ultranationalism and imperial ambition. The true spirit of bushido, which emphasized protection of the weak and service to just causes, became overshadowed by a militant ideology that demanded blind obedience and glorified death in battle. Yet even in this darkest period, individual examples of authentic samurai virtue continued to shine through. Military leaders like Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku, who opposed the war with America while loyally serving his country when it came, embodied the traditional samurai tension between personal conviction and duty to one's lord. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, followed by Japan's surrender in August 1945, brought not only military defeat but a profound spiritual crisis. The entire system of values that had guided Japan for centuries seemed to have led to catastrophic failure, requiring a fundamental re-examination of what it meant to be Japanese. The American occupation under General MacArthur presented Japan with yet another transformation as dramatic as the Meiji Restoration. The new constitution, with its famous Article 9 renouncing war as a sovereign right, seemed to mark the final end of the warrior tradition that had shaped Japanese culture for over a millennium. Yet the deeper values of the samurai tradition, dedication to excellence, group loyalty, and willingness to sacrifice for the common good, proved remarkably adaptable to the needs of post-war reconstruction. The same spirit that had once motivated warriors to die for their lords now inspired workers to rebuild their shattered nation with extraordinary determination and skill. The economic miracle of the 1950s and 1960s was built upon organizational principles and work ethics that drew heavily upon samurai traditions. Companies became the new clans, demanding and receiving loyalty from employees who in return were promised lifetime employment and care for their families. The warrior's dedication to his lord found new expression in the salaryman's commitment to his corporation. Education remained a crucial arena for transmitting modified versions of traditional values. While the explicitly militaristic elements of pre-war moral education were eliminated, schools continued to emphasize discipline, group harmony, and dedication to collective goals. The samurai ideal of the cultivated warrior became the modern ideal of the well-educated citizen. The martial arts experienced a remarkable revival during this period, but now as methods of physical and spiritual development rather than preparation for combat. Judo became an Olympic sport, while Aikido and karate spread throughout the world as ways of achieving personal growth through disciplined practice and philosophical study. The preservation and promotion of traditional culture became a new form of national service. Masters of tea ceremony, flower arrangement, and other traditional arts were designated as living national treasures, recognizing their role in maintaining Japan's cultural identity while the country underwent rapid modernization. Business leaders like Matsushita Konosuke and Honda Soichiro demonstrated how entrepreneurial success could be achieved through application of samurai values like persistence, attention to detail, and concern for employee welfare. Their companies became models of how modern capitalism could be conducted according to ethical principles derived from traditional Japanese values. The international success of Japanese products in the 1960s and beyond reflected not only technological sophistication, but also the cultural values of craftsmanship and continuous improvement that had characterized samurai approaches to skill development. The concept of kaizen, constant, incremental improvement, applied samurai training methods to manufacturing and business processes. Literature and film of this period explored the tensions between traditional values and modern realities with unprecedented depth and sophistication. Directors like Kurosawa Akira created cinematic masterpieces that examined the samurai tradition with both admiration and critical insight, helping both Japanese and international audiences understand the complexity of this cultural heritage. As Japan emerged as a prosperous, peaceful democracy, it became clear that the essential elements of the samurai spirit had not only survived the trials of war and defeat, but had been refined and strengthened. The values of service, excellence, and group solidarity that had once motivated warriors now drove the creation of one of the world's most successful modern societies. Like seeds carried on gentle winds to distant shores, the influence of samurai culture began to spread far beyond the islands of Japan as the world grew smaller and more interconnected. The latter decades of the 20th century witnessed the remarkable phenomenon of samurai ideals and practices taking root in societies across the globe, adapted to new cultures while retaining their essential wisdom. The martial arts led this cultural expansion, as judo, karate, aikido, and kendo found enthusiastic practitioners on every continent. These disciplines offered more than physical training. They provided structured paths for personal development that combined rigorous practice with philosophical inquiry, appealing to people seeking meaning and discipline in increasingly chaotic modern life. Business schools around the world began studying Japanese management methods, recognizing that the extraordinary success of Japanese companies reflected cultural values as much as technical expertise. Concepts like quality circles, consensus decision-making, and long-term employee relationships were adopted by corporations seeking to improve both productivity and worker satisfaction. The popularity of Japanese cinema, particularly the films of Kurosawa Akira, introduced global audiences to the aesthetic and philosophical dimensions of samurai culture. Movies like Seven Samurai and Yojimbo became cultural touchstones that influenced filmmakers and audiences worldwide, demonstrating the universal appeal of stories about honor, sacrifice, and the struggle between duty and desire. Zen Buddhism, deeply intertwined with samurai culture, found new audiences in the West as people sought alternatives to materialistic values and competitive individualism. The samurai integration of spiritual practice with daily life offered a model for finding meaning and peace in the midst of professional and personal challenges. The concept of bushido began to be studied and adapted by military organizations around the world. Professional officers recognized that the samurai code offered valuable insights into leadership, ethical decision-making, and the proper relationship between military service and civilian society. The emphasis on protecting rather than conquering resonated with modern concepts of military professionalism. Educational systems in many countries incorporated elements of Japanese pedagogical methods that reflected samurai values of discipline, group responsibility, and continuous improvement. The Japanese emphasis on moral education, alongside academic achievement, offered alternatives to purely individualistic approaches to learning and character development. Sports psychology and coaching methods increasingly drew upon samurai training techniques that emphasized mental discipline, visualization, and the integration of mind and body. Athletes and coaches found that these ancient methods could enhance performance while maintaining ethical standards and respect for opponents. The environmental movement discovered in samurai culture a model for the respectful relationship between humans and nature that offered alternatives to purely exploitative approaches to natural resources. The samurai appreciation for the changing seasons and the beauty of the natural world provided philosophical foundations for sustainable living practices. In the realm of technology and innovation, the samurai principles of continuous improvement and attention to detail influenced the development of quality management systems and design philosophies that valued elegance and functionality over mere complexity. The samurai aesthetic of refined simplicity found expression in everything from computer interfaces to architectural design. Therapeutic practices inspired by samurai training methods began to be used in treating psychological disorders and addiction. The disciplined, step-by-step approach to self-improvement that characterized samurai education offered structured methods for personal transformation that complemented traditional medical and psychological treatments. Women around the world found inspiration in the stories of female samurai like Tomo Gozen and the strong women of samurai families who managed domains and raised children according to the warrior code. These historical examples provided models for combining strength and grace, professional achievement and family responsibility. The samurai ideal of the warrior scholar resonated with professionals who sought to excel in their fields while maintaining broader cultural interests and social responsibilities. The integration of technical expertise with humanistic learning that characterized samurai education offered an alternative to narrow specialization. As the 21st century dawned, it became clear that samurai culture had evolved from a uniquely Japanese phenomenon into a global resource for addressing universal human challenges. The ancient wisdom of the warrior class had found new expressions in contexts that its original practitioners could never have imagined, yet the essential spirit remained unchanged. In the glowing screens and silent servers of the digital age, the samurai spirit found yet another transformation as humanity entered an era where information became the new battlefield and knowledge the most powerful weapon. The principles that had once guided warriors through physical conflicts now offered guidance for navigating the complexities of cyberspace and virtual communities. The discipline required for mastering traditional martial arts proved remarkably applicable to the world of computer programming and software development. Programmers who approached their craft with samurai-like dedication to perfection and continuous improvement created elegant, efficient code that demonstrated the same aesthetic principles that had characterized classical Japanese arts. In the realm of cybersecurity, professionals found inspiration in the samurai role as protectors of their domains. The vigilance, strategic thinking, and ethical commitment required to defend digital infrastructure against attacks reflected the same qualities that had made samurai effective guardians of their physical territories centuries earlier. The concept of honor in online interactions took on new meaning as digital communities struggled with issues of identity, authenticity, and respectful discourse. The samurai emphasis on truthfulness and consideration for others provided frameworks for ethical behavior in virtual environments where traditional social controls were often absent. Video game designers drew extensively upon samurai imagery and philosophy, creating virtual worlds where players could explore themes of honor, duty, and personal growth. These games became new venues for experiencing and discussing the moral dilemmas that had always been central to samurai literature and philosophy. The rise of social media presented both opportunities and challenges for applying samurai values. The tradition of restraint and thoughtful communication that characterized educated samurai offered alternatives to the impulsiveness and aggression that often characterized online discourse, while the samurai sense of community responsibility provided models for positive digital citizenship. Entrepreneurs in the technology sector found that samurai principles of long-term thinking and stakeholder consideration offered sustainable alternatives to purely profit-driven business models. Companies that prioritized employee welfare and social impact, alongside financial returns, demonstrated the continued relevance of the warrior's code of benevolent leadership. The global nature of digital communication created new opportunities for cultural exchange and mutual learning. Japanese companies sharing their business practices with international partners, while foreign students of martial arts connected with traditional teachers through video conferencing, demonstrated how technology could facilitate rather than replace authentic human relationships. Artificial intelligence and robotics development in Japan explicitly drew upon samurai concepts of service and protection. Researchers designing robots to care for elderly people or assist in dangerous situations approached their work with the same sense of responsibility for human welfare that had motivated samurai in their protective roles. The discipline required for meditation and mindfulness practices found new applications in managing the information overload and constant connectivity of digital life. Techniques derived from samurai training help people maintain focus and inner peace despite the distractions and demands of modern technology. Online education platforms began incorporating elements of traditional Japanese pedagogical methods, emphasizing gradual skill development, respectful teacher-student relationships, and the integration of technical training with character formation. These approaches offered alternatives to purely instrumental views of education. The environmental crisis of the 21st century called forth responses that drew upon samurai concepts of responsibility to future generations and harmony with natural systems. Environmental activists and sustainable technology developers found inspiration in the long-term thinking and ecological awareness that had characterized traditional Japanese culture. Mental health professionals increasingly recognize the therapeutic value of practices derived from samurai training, particularly in treating anxiety, depression, and addiction. The structured approach to self-improvement and the emphasis on service to others that characterized the warrior path provided frameworks for recovery and personal growth. As the digital age matured, it became clear that the fundamental human needs addressed by samurai culture, for meaning, community, excellence, and service, remained unchanged despite technological transformation. The ancient wisdom continued to offer guidance for living with dignity and purpose in an increasingly complex world. In the gentle twilight of our long journey through the story of the samurai, we find ourselves in a quiet place where past and future meet, where the lessons of 1,000 years of warrior wisdom continue to illuminate the path forward for all who seek to live with honor, courage, and compassion in whatever circumstances they may find themselves. The samurai we have followed through their long history, from the first mounted warriors of the Heian court to the modern practitioners of martial arts and business ethics around the world, all shared a fundamental understanding that true strength comes not from dominating others, but from mastering oneself, not from accumulating power, but from serving something greater than personal ambition. The way of the warrior, as it evolved over the centuries, always emphasized the cultivation of both outer skills and inner character. Whether training with sword or bow, composing poetry, or managing administrative duties, the samurai approached each activity as an opportunity for self-development and service to their community. This integration of practical effectiveness with spiritual development remains as relevant today as it was 1,000 years ago. In our contemporary world of rapid change and complex challenges, the samurai example of maintaining balance between strength and gentleness, achievement and humility, offers valuable guidance for anyone seeking to live a meaningful life. The loyalty that defined samurai relationships was never mere obedience, but rather a freely chosen commitment based on mutual respect and shared values. This kind of loyalty, to family, friends, principles, and worthy causes, continues to be essential for creating the trust and cooperation that make human communities possible. The samurai appreciation for beauty in all its forms, from the perfect execution of a martial technique to the careful arrangement of flowers in a vase, reminds us that excellence in any field requires not just technical competence, but also aesthetic sensitivity and spiritual awareness. The pursuit of beauty ennobles both the practitioner and those who witness their work. The warrior's acceptance of impermanence, learned through Buddhist teaching and the constant presence of danger, paradoxically enabled them to live more fully in each moment. This understanding that all things pass away, while sometimes sad, also liberates us from excessive attachment to temporary circumstances and encourages us to find meaning in the present. The samurai tradition of lifelong learning, whether in martial arts, poetry, philosophy, or practical skills, offers a model for personal growth that remains valuable in our age of rapid technological and social change. The warrior who stopped learning was soon surpassed by others, just as individuals and organizations today must continuously adapt and improve to remain relevant. Perhaps most importantly, the samurai understood that individual excellence was meaningless unless it served the welfare of others. The greatest warriors were remembered not for their personal achievements, but for their contributions to the peace and prosperity of their communities. This lesson remains as vital today as ever. As we contemplate the long journey of the samurai through Japanese history and their continuing influence in the modern world, we can appreciate how a small group of provincial warriors grew into guardians of an entire civilization, and how their ideals and practices continue to inspire people everywhere who seek to combine strength with wisdom, achievement with service. The story of the samurai is ultimately a story about the human potential for growth, adaptation, and service to others. It shows us that it is possible to maintain core values while adapting to changing circumstances, to pursue excellence while remaining humble, and to exercise power while serving rather than dominating those under our influence. In our own lives, whether we are students or teachers, workers or leaders, parents or children, we can apply the lessons of the samurai way by approaching our daily activities with the same dedication to excellence, the same commitment to ethical behavior, and the same sense of responsibility for the welfare of others that characterize the best of the warrior tradition. And so our long journey through the story of the samurai comes to its gentle close, like cherry blossoms drifting slowly to earth at the end of spring, each petal carrying within it the essence of the tree from which it came. As we settle into peaceful rest, we can carry with us the timeless wisdom of these remarkable warriors who learned to find strength in service, beauty in discipline, and meaning in dedication to something greater than themselves. In the quiet darkness of night, we can imagine the sound of wind through bamboo groves, the distant call of temple bells marking the passage of time, and the soft footsteps of countless generations of samurai walking the path of honor and duty that leads not to glory, but to inner peace and the satisfaction of a life well lived in service to others. The way of the warrior continues, not in the clash of steel or the thunder of hoofbeats, but in the daily choices we make to live with integrity, to treat others with respect and compassion, to pursue excellence in our chosen endeavors, and to leave the world a little better than we found it. In this way, we all become inheritors of the samurai tradition. As sleep approaches with its gentle embrace, we can rest knowing that the values exemplified by the samurai, loyalty, courage, honor, respect, honesty, duty, and self-control, remain as beacons of hope and guidance in our complex modern world. Their story reminds us that it is always possible to choose the path of righteousness, no matter how difficult the circumstances. Sweet dreams await, filled perhaps with visions of moonlit gardens where warriors practice their forms in perfect silence, of mountain temples where monks and samurai studied together in pursuit of wisdom, and of peaceful villages protected by those who understood that true strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the power to preserve and nurture what is precious and beautiful in human life. And in the morning, when we wake refreshed and renewed, we will carry forward the gentle strength of the samurai spirit, finding in their ancient wisdom the guidance we need to face our own challenges with grace, dignity, and an unwavering commitment to the way of honor that leads to lasting peace for ourselves and all those whose lives we touch. The story ends, but the way continues, eternal and ever-present, waiting for each of us to take up the mantle of the peaceful warrior and walk the path of service, excellence, and compassion that leads not to conquest, but to the deepest fulfillment that human life can offer. Rest well, and dream of the way of the samurai that lives on in every act of kindness, every moment of courage, and every choice to do what is right rather than what is easy. In the silence of peaceful sleep, the gentle spirit of the samurai watches over all who seek to live with honor, and their story becomes part of the eternal dream of humanity's highest aspirations.